This was a few years ago. It was pretty late, past 1:30 to 2 a.m. I was living with this boy who was pretty abusive, and he had gotten really jealous at this party where we were at earlier that night. Not even an hour after we had gotten home, he tossed me out onto our front porch and locked the door behind me. I was knocking and pleading for him to please let me back inside. I was still wearing what I had worn to the party and was freezing out. I wasn't sure what to do. He had my phone, purse, and wallet in the house with him, so I just sat on the porch crying. When he turned off the lights both inside and outside of the house, I knew he wasn't going to let me back in. I felt so helpless and cold. I thought about knocking on the neighbor's door, but I had anxiety about waking any of them up and causing trouble for my boyfriend. So instead, I decided I would try to walk to the gas station and motel, which was like a little less than a mile away, so I could use their phone to try to call a girlfriend of mine to see if I could sleep over with her. A little bit into the walk, this tall white pickup truck was approaching on the opposite side of the road that I was on. I tried not to make eye contact for obvious reasons, but then I heard the truck stopping and beginning to make a U-turn, and my heart just started pounding. I just about froze up but forced myself to speed walk at the very least. The truck pulled up to me and this guy rolled down his window and asked what I was doing out this late. I told him how I was going to meet up with my friend at the gas station and that she was expecting me. He sort of smiled and offered me a ride. I said no thank you, citing that I shouldn't hitchhike. He told me, "Well good, I don't pick up hitchhikers or anyone. You don't look like a hitchhiker though, you just look like you need some help." He just kept driving next to me and told me I shouldn't think he was a creep, and he pulled out what looked like a police badge and told me he had just gotten off duty, which is why he was in civilian clothes and out so late. He said he wouldn't mind driving next to me just to make sure I'd get to where I was heading safely. I was naive and a bit too trusting of his kindness and credentials when he offered me a ride again, and I said that it would be nice because the gas station wasn't that far away anyway. He popped the door open for me and I hopped in. The radio was low. It was a little messy. The ashtray was full of cigarettes and there were a lot of newspapers on the passenger floor. As I was moving my feet, some of the papers shifted, showing a pair of handcuffs, some coffee cups, empty water bottles, rags, a highlight color bandana, and some other things. He apologized, saying that it was the truck he took hunting, but it was super warm, so I was happy and didn't mind at all. He told me his name was John. He asked why I was scantily dressed without a jacket, and I started to tell him about the party and the fight I had been in with my boyfriend. He was super charming and attentive. He even laughed that he could go back and arrest him. I asked about him and he told me about his family. He was a young dad. He had a wife, a daughter, a son, and a dog. And I told him it was like he had the perfect little family, and he laughed and said he certainly did. Then it sort of clicked for me to ask him if I could use his phone, but he said no because he had to save his battery. We were approaching the gas station and he drove right past it. I politely said, "Oh, I think that's the one," but he didn't answer me. I felt sick to my stomach. My heart started pounding. I started getting choked up. My eyes started tearing up as I was looking at the windows and watching the lights behind us getting further and further away. It was hard for me to even speak, but somehow I murmured, asking if he could please turn around, and he ignored me. Whenever I would look at him, he just looked empty-eyed and emotionless, totally dead and glazed. I looked back out the window and down at the road to see if maybe we were going slow enough that I could make a leap out the car without seriously injuring myself. I remember always hearing, "Never go to the second location," but I thought about the possibility of jumping out and breaking an ankle and how it would be a lot harder to get away with one foot as opposed to two, debating with myself that there was snow on the ground. But then again, snow is hard to get along in, especially when you're not fully clothed. I feel so dumb now too because I wasn't even tied up or anything. I was just so scared though, like there was nothing but trees, an empty road, and us. I was crying pretty badly at this point and asked if I could please borrow his phone again. I don't know why I even asked, and he told me to stop talking. Then he started talking underneath his breath, saying, "Girls shouldn't be out so late. You shouldn't have been alone this late. Look what you're doing to me." just like a slut, and other derogatory things. As he continued saying these terrible things, I wasn't even responding. I was just crying and trying to think past the fear I was feeling. I remember seeing a pair of handcuffs under the papers beneath my feet, so I used a small scooping motion with my feet to lift them. Then, using my heels and toes, I managed to push them under the bottom of my seat as far as I could. I was thinking of different things I could do to try to help myself, like if we were close enough to some upcoming lights or structures, I could just grab the wheel and cause us to crash into them, or maybe how if I got lucky enough for a cop to pass us, I could grab the wheel and swerve so he would appear to be drunk driving and will get pulled over. I guiltily thought about the possibility if this man is just having a weird night, and how if I did anything it would just hurt him. But I told myself that sort of thinking got me into this mess. He pulled off-road where there were still woods on both sides of us. On his side, the wooded trees were closer to the road. On mine, there was a small gap, fully covered in thick snow, before the trees thickly picked up again, maybe 10 to 16 yards away. He turned off the car and coldly said that there was something wrong with it, telling me to get out with him. As he grabbed the keys and stepped out, I clung to the center console, crying and pleading with him not to make me get out because it was too cold. He turned to face me, his door still open, and shouted for me to get out of the car because we had to check the trunk bed hatch. I dug my fingernails deeper into the console, thinking my cries of no and my desperate head shaking would force him to come around to my side and drag me out himself. Tears streamed down my face as I begged, "Please, John, I'm so cold and scared." I was thinking of everything I had ever heard. Humanize yourself. Use first names. He stared at me in a way I can't even describe to this day. I don't even know where to begin. Then he got back into the car. I slinked towards my window, terrified he would reach over the console and drag me out. He turned off the headlights, and everything around us turned a deep dark blue. He stared at the steering wheel for what felt like years before lighting a cigarette, looking out his window, then back at me, and then out his window again. He heard me shuffling my feet on the newspapers. I was just adjusting my legs, but still staring out his window. He told me that if I thought about running, he had a quick way to get me where he wanted me. Oddly enough, I had been thinking of running just minutes before, but I reasoned that if he wanted me out of the car, then I should definitely stay in. Otherwise, he could chase me or even shoot me. In case he had hunting rifles in the back, I didn't dare look. I'm glad I was right. At that point, I think I hit the bottom of my reserves. Instead of panic, there was just numbness and exhaustion. An occasional hot tear still rolled down my face, but mostly, I just remember feeling empty. I talked to a psychiatrist about this later, and he thought my ex-boyfriends had given me PTSD. It was dead quiet, but finally, I barely managed to whisper that my friend was still waiting for me. Then I asked about his wife and children. Flatly, he said he didn't have a wife or children, that his house was empty. I asked him what he was thinking about. "I'm thinking of what to do with you," he said. He didn't say it angrily, just flatly, coldly, which somehow scared me even more. I started to cry again, and he told me not to. Then he turned the car back on and offered me some heat. I just cried and said I wanted to go home. Eventually, he started driving again and kept going until we approached a gas station. I was trying to gauge the right moment to reach for the wheel, but before I could, he started slowing down. As he pulled up, he told me not to tell anyone or he would find me. Then, he said all he was doing was teaching me a lesson, not to hitchhike with strangers. He was almost at a complete stop when he told me to get out before he changed his mind. Before he could even get another look at me to assess my understanding, I was already out of the truck, sprinting towards the gas station. The panic was overwhelming, but I stopped for a moment, remembering to try to catch his license plate. I turned around but only managed to see a blur of the last 3 numbers as he drove off. I ran inside and begged the clerk behind the counter to call the police. I waited anxiously for the officer to arrive, but I'll be honest, I was terrified it would be John. My fears melted away when a new-faced policeman arrived. I gave him a description of John, his appearance, the vehicle's color and type, the part of the license plate number I had caught, and the fact that he claimed to be an off-duty cop. I told him everything I could remember. I asked if he could check the security camera footage. The officer disappeared into the back for a while, then returned, saying that there was nothing on the tapes. I asked if I could look at the footage myself, but the officer refused, asking if I didn't trust him. Not wanting to cause trouble, I told him of course I did. He gave me a ride to my friend's house, lecturing me the entire way about hitchhiking. He kept asking if I knew who Ted Bundy was. Of course I knew him. I was just naive enough to think it could never happen to me, and desperate for warmth. I never heard anything back about the report. I tried following up multiple times, but they never got back to me, except for one time when I was told my case number didn't exist. That didn't stop me from trying. Months and even years later, I asked my friend, whose house I slept in that night, if she had ever heard of any weird incidents like mine happening to her or anyone else in the area. She always said no. So eventually I let it go. I tried to convince myself that maybe he really was trying to teach me a lesson. I mean, I never hitchhiked again, so if it was a lesson, it certainly worked. But I never heard anything back about the case. I never heard of any other strange encounters in that area. Maybe it really was just that one man trying to teach me something. But honestly, sometimes I think I tell myself that just to help me sleep at night. It all felt too real. Even if it wasn't, I'm really glad I didn't get out of the car in the woods that night. In the summer of 2020, my friends Alex and Violet and I decided to go on a mountain vacation. COVID cabin fever had hit us hard, and we were desperate to get out. We planned a mountainous state and planned to camp and hike at several different locations. For one night, we thought it would be fun to book a cabin in the woods. Violet's parents had once rented a fire tower and loved it, but all we could find was a cabin beside the fire tower. It was cheap, clean, and secluded. Excited to have a night where we could be as obnoxious as we wanted, we booked it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we decided it would be a great idea to drop acid at the cabin. Violet bought an entire sheet in preparation, and it was tucked in her bag as we pulled out the driveway. But I had a knot in the pit of my stomach, an aching feeling that gnawed at me. I told Alex and Violet that there was no way we could drop acid that night. Violet was pissed. We turned around and got into a massive argument, but I stood my ground. I just knew we had no business tripping that night. Finally, after the fireworks settled, we were on our way. The cabin was roughly 30 minutes from the nearest town, and we held our breath as we rounded the busted road spiraling towards the top. There were no pull-offs, no other campsites, just a long, winding road leading us to the cabin at the peak. We settled in and started a fire to keep warm. As dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road, then the flash of headlights. A side-by-side with 3 kids arrived, and our nerves settled. They smiled, waved, climbed the fire tower, and left. We heard there might be occasional visitors to the fire tower, but they were the only ones who came by. We doused the fire and moved inside, heated some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, ate them fast, and sat in silence. You don't realize how quiet it is until you're in the middle of nowhere. You can hear every rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the wind through the branches. In the city, there's always white noise, the hum of an air conditioner, the distant road of traffic, but here, the closest thing to white noise was the sound of our own breathing. We jumped at every noise, too frightened to speak to one another, and finally, I had enough. I cracked open a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and slapped the board game down on the table between our bunk beds. It didn't take long for us to loosen up, and soon we were laughing, having the ruckus good time we had envisioned. We were much soberer than we had planned, but just enough to ignore the distant rustling in the woods. Later, we all recall hearing noises in the background, the snap of a twig, the faint rumble of an engine. None of us wanted to break the air of nonchalance, so we ignored it. Until a human hand reached up to the window between us and slapped it 3 times. We screamed in an instant. Alex called 911, put them on speakerphone, and handed his cell to me. He grabbed pokers from the fireplace and passed them out. Violet started calling family members, saying her last goodbyes. I held my breath, listening for any more sounds. Whoever this was, whatever this was, had heard us call 911. Now they were being careful, making a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived 20 minutes later, which was lucky for a 1 a.m. emergency call. They had their dogs comb the mountain. Nothing. They suggested it might have been a bear, but I could tell from their faces they didn't believe that for a second. We had barely cooked those hot dogs, and why would a bear slap a window by a group of screaming kids rather than go for the pan we had used? Why would a bear knock like a human? Why, when we screamed, didn't make a stealthy retreat? They had no answers, but they had one chilling detail. As they sped towards us, they came across a car at the base of the mountain. That was the only sign of life they had seen. My blood ran cold. Violet and Alex were too frazzled to absorb the weight of what they had said. Instead, distracted by a new horror, Violet's car, which had been covered in dust from the drive up, was now covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours. Handprints in places we hadn't touched. We grabbed our things by the armful, threw them inside the car, and followed the police down the mountain, eager to remove every trace of ourselves from that place. Every pothole found us further and further from that wretched cabin. We made it down in record time and found lodging at a seedy hotel that reeked of cat piss. I couldn't sleep. The thought of that car on the road rang in my head. Remember, there was nothing else on that mountain, just a single narrow road leading to the top. No pull-offs, no other campsites. Maybe it was a visitor to the fire tower playing a cruel joke? But the kids from earlier, we had seen their headlights. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way. They didn't want to be spotted. They wanted silence. Secrecy. Whoever this was hadn't been looking for a cheap scare. They had planned this. I don't think I'll ever know what the person on the mountain wanted from me. I don't know if it was a prank or the beginning of something much worse. I'm grateful for Alex's quick thinking in calling 911. I wonder if our visitor knew we had service. It has certainly been a welcome surprise to us. Maybe that was a wrench in their plan, enough to spook them before things could get ugly. In truth, I don't know if I want to know. I think I'm just content to say, Midnight Stranger, let's not meet.